So, endocrine system is a very important system. Here, with the help of this video, we are going to start learning about endocrine system. So, after that, we will be learning about organization of the endocrine system, hormone receptor interactions, anterior pituitary gland and hypothalamus, posterior pituitary gland, thyroid gland, calcium homeostasis, adrenal cortex along with adrenal medulla, then endocrine pancreas and glucose homeostasis, all those aspects. So, organization of the endocrine system. Endocrine glands. These are glands that secrete their hormones directly into the blood rather than through a duct. Prostaglandins are a family of lipid compounds found in various tissues and are involved in a wide range of body responses, including endocrine responses, inflammation, muscle contraction, and homeostasis. These two terms are some technical terms or jargons. Now we are going to have an introduction. The human body has two major control mechanisms, the nervous system and the endocrine system. While the nervous system can control and communicate rapidly with other systems, the endocrine system control and communicate with the help of chemical messengers and is a much slower system. However, the effects of the endocrine system may be more prolonged and sustained. Now let's have a definition of a hormone. The term hormone is derived from a Greek word meaning to excite or to arouse. The term was first used by Ernest Henry Starling in 1905 in his first lecture delivered to the Royal Society. So Starling, along with Bayliss, had discovered one of the first hormones called secretin in 1902. An endocrine hormone is a chemical substance that is produced by endocrine glands or a group of endocrine cells in response to certain stimuli and carried by blood to target tissues where they exert their physiological actions. An endocrine hormone is a chemical substance that is produced by endocrine glands or a group of endocrine cells in response to certain stimuli and carried by blood to target tissues. The endocrine hormones are carried by the circulatory system to cells throughout the body, including the nerve system in some cases, where they bind with receptors and initiate many cell reactions. Some endocrine hormones affect many different types of cells of the body. For example, growth hormone from the anterior pituitary gland causes growth in most parts of the body, and thyroxine from the thyroid gland increase the rate of many chemical reactions in almost all body cells. Then coordination of body functions by chemical messengers. The multiple activities of the cells, tissues, and organs of the body are coordinated by the interplay of several types of chemical messenger systems. Neurotransmitters are released by axon terminals of neurons into the synaptic junctions and act locally to control nerve cell functions. We mentioned the multiple activities of the cells, tissues, and organs of the body are coordinated by the interplay of several types of chemical messenger systems like neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are released by axon terminals of neurons, we know that, into the synaptic junctions or synaptic clefts and act locally to control nerve cell functions. Then endocrine hormones are released by glands and specialized cells into the circulating blood and influence the function of target cells at another location in the body. Then neuroendocrine hormones are secreted by neurons into the circulating blood and influence the function of target cells at another location in the body. Then paracrines are secreted by cells into the extracellular fluid and affect neighboring target cells of a different type. And autocrines are secreted by cells into the extracellular fluid and affect the function of the same cell that produced them. Then cytokines are peptides secreted by cells into the extracellular fluid and can function as autocrine, paracrine, or endocrine hormones. Cytokines. Examples of cytokines include the interleukins and other lymphokines that are secreted by helper cells and act on other cells of the immune system. Cytokine hormones, for example leptin, produced by Adipocytes are sometimes called adipokines. Adipocytes are nothing else but fat stored in cells. We know that. So they secrete some sort of cytokine hormones called leptins. So they are collectively known as adipokines because they are produced by adipocytes. So they are known as adipokines. Okay. So in the next few chapters, we discuss mainly the endocrine and neuroendocrine hormone systems, keeping in mind that many of the body's chemical messenger systems interact with one another to maintain homeostasis. For example, the adrenal medulla and the pituitary gland secrete their hormones primarily in response to neuronal stimuli. So, the multiple hormone systems play a key role in regulating almost all body functions, including metabolism, growth and development, water and electrolyte balance, reproduction, and behavior. For instance, without growth hormone, a person would be a dwarf. So, without thyroxine and triiodothyronine from the thyroid gland, almost all the chemical reactions of the body would become sluggish, and the person would become sluggish as well because his body processes are slow. And without insulin from the pancreas, the body's cells could use little of the food carbohydrates for energy. And without the sex hormones, sexual development and sexual functions would be absent. That is the importance of learning about the endocrine system of human. Okay. First, paracrine secretions. Paracrine secretions are those chemicals, when released, exerts its effect on cells and tissues located on the neighborhood of its site of secretion. This, by convention, includes neurotransmitters actually, paracrine secretions. Paracrine hormones are dispersed by simple diffusion in the intestinal fluid, and this restricts their action to short distances. Local enzymes in the vicinity usually rapidly inactivate the paracrine secretions, thus preventing adequate entry into the bloodstream. Examples of paracrine secretions include the following, which are the histamine released from cells in the stomach mucosa has a direct influence on the parietal cells of the oxyntic glands, causing an increase in acid secretion. The neurotransmitters such as acetylcholine act on the parietal cells in the stomach mucosa, causing an increase in acid secretion. Then prostaglandins, PGE2, is responsible for cervical dilation at the time of childbirth or parturition. Then next, so examples, histamines released from the cells in the stomach mucosa, neurotransmitters such as acetylcholine acting on parietal cells in the stomach mucosa, then prostaglandins. These are paracrine hormones. Paracrine hormones in the sense, paracrine secretions actually. They act in the neighborhood of the site of secretion, of its site of secretion. Primarily neurotransmitters. So autocrine cells, autocrine secretion acting on the same cell. Paracrine cells, paracrine secretion at distant target cell. Endocrine gland, adrenal gland, hormone, vascular system, target cell at a distance. So wait a minute, neurotransmitters are hormones or not? I'm not sure about that. We will be learning that later. Okay, so I'm just mentioning paracrine secretions only. Okay. Then autocrine secretions. Autocrine secretions are chemicals which are secreted by specific cells into the extracellular fluid surrounding the cell and which acts upon the very cells that secrete it. Examples of autocrine secretions are as follows. Norepinephrine that is released by neurons in the adrenal medulla further inhibits norepinephrine released by those cells. Insulin released from beta cells in the pancreas has an inhibitory effect on insulin secreted by these beta cells, which is independent of glucose levels in the blood. Example for autocrine secretions, which are the norepinephrine and insulin. And location of major endocrine organs. Anatomical loci of the major endocrine glands and endocrine tissues of the body, except for the placenta, which is an additional source of sex hormones. Hypothalamus, we know hypothalamus, pineal gland, pituitary gland, then parathyroid glands, which are located behind the thyroid glands, thymus gland, then adrenal glands, pancreas, kidney, stomach region, then adipose tissue, small intestine will be there. This is an anatomical loci of the principal endocrine glands and tissues of the body. Ovaries, testicles in case of male. Okay. Then feedback control of hormone secretion, levels of control within the endocrine system. Although the plasma concentrations of many hormones fluctuate in response to various stimuli that occur throughout the day, all hormones studied thus far appear to be closely controlled. There are several control mechanisms that exist to regulate the levels of hormones very precisely. An example to review is the hypophysiotropic hormones with a three-level sequence to understand the different levels of hormone control. There are three levels of feedback control as indicated. Long loop feedback control. Remember, long loop feedback control. In this case, the hormone secreted by the peripheral endocrine gland provides a negative feedback to the hypothalamus or the anterior pituitary gland. For example, excess levels of thyroxine will inhibit both the anterior pituitary gland from secreting thyroid stimulating hormone and the hypothalamus from secreting thyrotropin releasing hormone. Then short loop feedback control. In this mechanism, the anterior pituitary hormone in plasma provides a negative feedback to the hypothalamus, decreasing the secretion of releasing hormones. Then ultra short loop feedback control. In this mechanism, the releasing hormones themselves have a negative feedback influence on the hypothalamus, thus secreting the secretion of the hypothalamic hormones. So three methods are there for feedback control: long loop feedback control, then short loop feedback control. Short loop in the sense the anterior pituitary hormone in plasma provides a negative feedback to the hypothalamus, decreasing the secretion of releasing hormones. Then ultra short loop feedback control. In this mechanism, the releasing hormone themselves have a negative feedback influence on the hypothalamus, thus decreasing the secretion of the hypothalamic hormones. The negative feedback prevents overactivity of hormone systems. In most instances, hormonal control is exerted through negative feedback mechanisms that ensure a proper level of hormone activity at the target tissues. After a stimulus causes release of the hormone, conditions or products resulting from the action of the hormone tend to suppress its further release. In other words, the hormone or one of its products have a negative feedback effect to prevent oversecretion of the hormone or overactivity at the target tissue. The controlled variable is sometimes not the secretory rate of the hormone but the degree of activity of the target tissue. Therefore, only when the target tissue activity rises to an appropriate level will feedback signals to the endocrine gland become powerful enough to show further secretion of the hormone. Then feedback regulation of hormones can occur at all levels, including gene transcription and translation steps involved in the synthesis of hormones and steps involved in processing hormones or releasing stored hormones. Examples of negative feedback mechanisms: negative feedback by plasma levels of thyroid hormones on the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary gland. Then another example, negative feedback by plasma cortisol levels on the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary gland. Okay, then searches of hormones can occur with positive feedback. In a few instances, positive feedback occurs when the biological action of the hormone causes additional secretion of the hormone. One example of positive feedback is the surge of luteinizing hormone or LH that occurs as a result of the stimulatory effect of estrogen on the anterior pituitary before ovulation. The secreted LH then acts on the ovaries to stimulate additional secretions of estrogen, which in turn cause more secretion of LH. Once again, I'm going to read this. Positive feedback is the surge of luteinizing hormone LH that occurs as a result of stimulatory effect of estrogen on the anterior pituitary before ovulation. The secreted LH then acts on the ovaries to stimulate additional secretion of estrogen, which in turn causes more secretion of LH. So eventually LH reaches an appropriate concentration and typical negative feedback control of hormone secretion is then exerted. And cyclical variations occur in hormone release. Superimposed on the negative and positive feedback control of hormone secretion are periodic variations in hormone release that are influenced by seasonal changes. So various stages of development and aging, the diurnal, that means daily cycle, and sleep. For example, the secretion of growth hormone is markedly increased during the early period of sleep but is reduced during the later stages of sleep. In many cases, these cyclical variations in hormone secretion are due to changes in activity of neural pathway involved in controlling hormone release. Then clinical conditions associated with altered hormone release. Various clinical conditions can manifest if the secretion of hormone is altered, either due to hyposecretion or hypersecretion. For example, gigantism in children, acromegaly in adults, Graves' disease, hyperparathyroidism, hyperinsulinism, Cushing syndrome, pheochromocytoma, Addison's disease, etc.